This shocked Red Bull. Max Verstappen stepped into a Mercedes at the Nürburgring and delivered a level of pace that raised serious questions inside his own team. Not just fast. Not just impressive. Uncomfortable. Because this happened in one of the most unpredictable races in motorsport. Over 100 cars on track. Constant traffic. Zero margin for error. And he made it look easy. But here's what makes this moment different. This wasn't a one-time appearance. This was an official, structured program, built step by step to prepare him for endurance racing. Which means this performance was real, measured, and repeatable. Because when a driver can jump into a completely different car, a rival manufacturer, a completely different racing world, and still dominate the pace, that's not just talent. That's control at a level Formula One cannot ignore. But here's the question Red Bull is now forced to ask. If Verstappen can do this without their car, what happens if someone else gives him a better one? At first, Red Bull wasn't worried. Why would they be? This was supposed to be controlled. A side program. A different category. A different world. Nothing that could interfere with Formula One. Nothing that could raise questions. But that assumption didn't last long. Because the moment Verstappen started building rhythm, everything changed. Not publicly. Not dramatically. But internally. Because Red Bull knows him better than anyone. They know how he behaves when he's pushing. They know how he reacts when something feels off. They know the signs. And what they saw at the Nürburgring didn't match any of them. Because there was no struggle. No adaptation phase. No visible limit. Just control. From the very beginning. And that's unusual. Because even for Verstappen, a GT3 car is a completely different machine. More weight. Less downforce. Abs. Traction control. Everything working against his natural instincts. And yet, he didn't fight it. He understood it. Almost instantly. And that's where the first concern appears. Because when a driver adapts that quickly, it means one thing. His performance is not dependent on familiarity. It's not dependent on repetition. It's something deeper. Something transferable. But here's where things start to feel uncomfortable inside Red Bull. Because while Verstappen is adapting, he's also operating without them. Different engineers. Different feedback. Different philosophy. And still, the same result. And that's the detail that changes everything. Because Formula One teams don't just build cars. They build systems around drivers. Systems designed to maximize performance. To create consistency. To create control. But what happens when a driver doesn't need that system to reach the same level? That's the question Red Bull wasn't expecting to face. Because now, this is no longer just a strong performance. This is independence. Performance without reliance. And that's rare. Extremely rare. But here's where the tension starts to build. Because this wasn't just about maintaining pace. Verstappen started increasing it. Not aggressively. Not visibly. But consistently. And that's when the data becomes impossible to ignore. Because Red Bull doesn't look at highlights. They look at details. Sector times. Consistency. Inputs. And what they saw was something very clear. No drop. No fluctuation. No sign of reaching the limit. Just stability. Relentless stability. And that's what creates real concern. Because a driver who can operate like that, in any environment, becomes unpredictable. Not on track. In the future. Because now, the question is no longer about performance. It's about control. Who controls that level? Who maximizes it? Who builds around it? And that's where everything begins to shift. But here's the part that makes this even more serious. Because Verstappen wasn't just driving. He was learning. Understanding how another top team operates. How they think. How they build performance. And once a driver has that knowledge, you can't take it away. It stays. It evolves. It influences decisions. And that's what Red Bull understands. Because this is not just about one race. It's about what this race creates. Awareness. On both sides. And once that awareness exists, the dynamic changes. Quietly. But permanently. So now, this isn't just a story about pace. Or domination. Or adaptation. This is about something much bigger. Because what Verstappen showed at the Nürburgring was not just how fast he is, but how little he needs to reach that level. And that is what truly shocked Red Bull. And this is where it becomes impossible to ignore. Because up to this point, Red Bull could still explain it. Talent, adaptation, experience at the Nürburgring. All valid. All comfortable. But what happens next removes that comfort completely. Because Verstappen doesn't just maintain the level. He raises it. Again. And this is where the shift becomes visible. Because now, it's not just about being consistent. It's about controlling everyone else's race. And that's a completely different level of dominance. Because once a driver controls the pace, they control the outcome. Without taking risks. Without overdriving. Without exposing themselves. And that's exactly what Verstappen started doing. Quietly. But very clearly. He increased the pressure. Not on himself. On everyone else. And that's when mistakes begin to appear. Other drivers start chasing. Braking later. Taking more risks in traffic. Trying to match a rhythm they don't fully understand. And that's where everything starts to break. Because the Nürburgring punishes that instantly. One small miscalculation. And the lap is gone. Sometimes more than the lap. And Verstappen? He does the opposite. He becomes even calmer. Even more precise. And that contrast is what destroys the competition. But here's the part that Red Bull cannot ignore anymore. Because this is no longer about adaptation. This is control at a level that doesn't depend on context. Not on the car. Not on the team. Not on the environment. And that's where the real concern begins. Because now, this is not just their driver. This is a driver operating above the system. And drivers like that, they don't stay limited for long. But here's where it becomes even more uncomfortable. Because while Verstappen is controlling the race, he's also doing something else. He's proving a point. Without saying a single word. Because performances like this, they don't need explanations. They send a message. To teams. To engineers. To decision makers. And that message is simple. He doesn't need perfect conditions. He creates them. And that is incredibly valuable. Because in Formula One, everything is built around minimizing uncertainty. And a driver like this removes it. Almost completely. But here's the final layer that changes everything for Red Bull. Because this performance doesn't just show what Verstappen can do. It shows what others can see. Because now, every top team has the same data. The same reference. The same proof. that his level translates anywhere. And once that proof exists, interest grows. Quietly. Strategically. Because teens don't react publicly. They observe. They wait. They calculate. And then, they move. But the moment they start thinking, the balance already begins to shift. And that's exactly what this performance created. A shift. Not visible yet. Not confirmed. But real. Because now, Red Bull is no longer the only place where Verstappen works. They're just the place where he currently is. And that distinction is everything. Because once a driver proves he can dominate outside your system, you no longer control the narrative. You react to it. And that's the position Red Bull now finds itself in. Not losing control, but no longer owning it completely. And that changes how decisions are made, how contracts are viewed, how the future is planned. Because this wasn't just a race. It was a demonstration. A very clear one. That Verstappen's level exists independently. And once that becomes undeniable, everything else follows. So now, after everything that happened, after everything Red Bull has seen, there is only one question left. Not about the Nürburgring. Not about this performance. But about what comes next. Because if Verstappen no longer depends on one system, then what exactly is stopping him from choosing a different one?